Hello and welcome everybody. I'm Anthony Gonzalez and I'm the Senior Program Coordinator with the Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Drug Misuse Prevention and Recovery. And we're very excited to be able to offer this session in collaboration with ARAG. Today's session is titled Ethics in the Collegiate Recovery Professional. Joining us today as presenters is Jessica Estock and Lily Ettinger. Before we get started, I do just have a couple of housekeeping slides I'd like to share with everybody. Here on the screen should look somewhat familiar as we are in the Zoom webinar format. We do welcome your questions at any time throughout the live session, but we do kindly ask that you utilize the Q&A feature. We do have the chat enabled, so please feel free to introduce yourself and share where you're joining us from, as well as any resources and reflections as it relates to the presented content. But again, we do just kindly ask that you utilize the Q&A feature. We also have captioning enabled for today's session. You should be able to turn that on through your bottom dashboard. If you have any issues getting that set up, please just send me a message and I will try my best to walk you through that process. We also encourage everybody to learn more about becoming a member of the Higher Education Center. You can learn more about the different membership tiers and the benefits that go along with them by visiting our website at hecaod.osu.edu. We also have a few upcoming events that I'd love to share with everybody. Our Fall Learning Collaborative will be taking place October 10th and is a symposium format, so it will be an all-day virtual event, and we'll be focusing on the biennial review process. The full agenda is posted on our website, so you can learn more by visiting our website. We also have a free webinar taking place towards the end of October and is titled The Color of College Health, Utilizing the LEAP Strategy to Improve the Well-Being of minority students, and will be presented by Santia Zell. And we also have a three-part series titled Fundamentals of Substance Misuse Prevention in Higher Education, and that will be taking place in November and will be facilitated by our very own Cindy Clowner and Logan Davis. And with that, it is my great pleasure to turn it over to our presenters today. Joining us today are Jessica Estock, from Assistant Director of Substance Use Recovery Services from the University of Delaware. And joining them is Lily Ettinger, the Director for the Center for Students in Recovery at the University of Texas at Austin. Thank you both so much for joining us today, and it's my pleasure turning it over to you at this time.
Thank you so much, Anthony. So just to introduce myself formally, before I share my screen with the slides that we have, as Anthony said, my name is Jess Estock. I've had a slight title difference. I am now Interim Assistant Director for Collegiate Recovery Programming, and I am at the University of Delaware. I'll toss it over to Lily.
And hi, y'all. My name is Lily Ettinger. I am the director for the Center for Students in Recovery at UT Austin, as well as a PhD student in the program for higher education, policy, and leadership in the School of Education at UT Austin. So with that, we're going to get started. I'll let Jessica share the slides. And our second slide will be our learning objectives, and I'll get us started there. So we've got three learning objectives today. So the first is that we're going to gain an understanding of some of the history of why Jessica and I and many other people associated with the Association for Recovery in Higher Education collaborated and worked on this document for many years about why we have this, what's going on here. Our second is to help y'all identify how you can exemplify different ethical principles in your own professional experiences. And last and definitely not least is some common ethical dilemmas and how we can resolve them. That, I'll let Jess.
All right, so I'm going to share a little bit about the what and the why of the work that we're doing as well. But before that, I just want to ask everybody to kind of take a moment to really be present, ground yourself, enter in the space of where we could take in information regarding ethical principles and collegiate recovery. I also want to thank everybody for being here so much, and thank you to the Higher Ed Center as well. So I typically, when I'm presenting in person, I like to have a land acknowledgement. And we are far and wide, I am sure, with who is here with us today. So I am just going to see if I can drop this in the chat. If you do not know the land in which you occupy, I would encourage you to use that link and learn a little bit more about the land in which you spend your time, the land in which you occupy as well. Thank you. And so talking a little bit about the what and the why, the ethical principles for the collegiate recovery professional are endorsed by the ARHE board members as well as the advisory council. And to talk a little bit more about the board versus the advisory council, first off, ARHE, Association of Recovery in Higher Education. The advisory council are volunteer members who really are doing the work. So they're involved in collegiate recovery programs. They are the ones who are working with all of the students. They have their finger on the pulse of the field, and they can guide the direction that the field goes in. So the work of the ethical principles also lived with the advisory council for a little bit. There was some previous work, which we'll talk about in a little while as well. But the advisory council is kind of the thing that pushes the field forward. So these ethical considerations are an agreed upon set of guidelines for professional affiliate members of ARHE. They are not a set of standards for the program. So there are standards and recommendations for collegiate recovery programs, but this is instead designed to guide the staff that are serving in these programs. And the why being, we want to prioritize the physical and emotional well-being of our students. So we know that the students that we serve are a vulnerable population, and we want to prioritize them doing well. So prioritizing their physical well-being, their emotional well-being. But the flip side, ethical principles also protect the staff of the programs because it gives us a framework of how we interact with our students. The who and not the band. So ethical principles for collegiate recovery professionals are for everybody who is working in a collegiate recovery program. So it includes the clinical, the non-clinical, and the interns who are involved in coordinating and executing the functions of a program. We recognize that we come from lots and lots of backgrounds. Personally, I come from a clinical background, so that was the lens in which our program was kind of constructed, although we do not do clinical work, but it would cover me as a clinical and non-clinical. Currently, I'm a non-clinical professional, but it also includes the interns who are helping out with our programs, our peer recovery specialists, our non-clinical staff. So we also recognize that since we come to this work from so many different backgrounds, we might have a number of different ethical codes that we're following. So staff members should always follow the most restrictive of the ethical considerations. Again, not the band. So it covers everyone. I mentioned that this work, and Lily had also mentioned that this work was done in a group, right? This was not work that was done by one person in a silo. So we always want to recognize the work of the people who put in the hours. So you'll notice two familiar names. Myself and Lily were part of that working group that grew out of the advisory council, but also recognizing Angie Bryan and Joshua Redding for all of their hours over the many years of work. Yes, years. And also recognizing Sierra Castedo de Martel for her early work on the project too. And I will turn it over to Lily.
So one of the biggest issues that we have discovered when we're discussing ethical dilemmas is not even realizing that there may be an ethical dilemma in an action that we're choosing. So we're going to start with a couple polls. So I have a first poll for y'all, and it is, again, there's not right or wrong answers off the top, but here's an ethical issue that we've seen in programs. Should I, as a staff member, attend the meetings, the recovery meetings on my campus?
I have just launched the poll. It should have popped up on your screen. If not, there should be a poll button on your bottom dashboard. I'll leave it open for another 5 or so seconds, and then I'll share those results. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it and share those results.
All right. And now I'm going to make y'all wait to figure out what the actual answers and what we're going to talk about, why y'all have a really great range of different answers. So I have another poll for y'all. Do I give a student another chance when their attitude is that they're not willing to adhere to the commitment of the Collegiate Recovery Program, the CRP contract?
I'm going to leave it open for just a few more seconds and then I'll share those results.
Y'all are such quick voters. I really appreciate it. And again, we're going to come back to it, but isn't this incredible how many different answers there are? And then last but not least, I use an app to track my workouts, aka Strava, for example. And it includes the location of where I run. Should I friend students or let students friend me on the app?
I'll just leave it open for a few more seconds and then I'll share the results.
Right. Thank you all so much. We're going to come back to them after I pass it off to Jess.
I do think it's interesting that that last one was like heavier on the no side. So one person with a yes with boundaries, some maybes. It's just really kind of interesting. And as Lily said, we're going to come back to those questions towards the end after we go through the different ethical principles of collegiate recovery professionals. So there are six different principles that we've kind of talked about. Through our working group, we went through many different codes of ethics. We looked through NADAC, the addiction professionals, peer recovery support specialists, counselors, certifications. And so in looking at all of those different codes of ethics, we wanted to kind of think about what was relevant to our field, what would be most helpful. So really narrowing it down to six. Now, I will say that this document is fluid, meaning that it's going to be reviewed and revised as we move through the field. And actually, I was just talking with somebody and thinking about this is something that we're going to take a look at over the course of the next year as well. So with any suggestions moving forward, I would feel free to share them with ARHE, and we'll share their website towards the end as well. So ethical principle number one, non-malfeasance and beneficence. So ultimately, even though many people who are in charge of coordinating, running, directing collegiate recovery programs may be in long-term recovery themselves, running a collegiate recovery program is not about the staff member's recovery, right? So this is about assisting students. This is about guiding students, connecting them with the resources that they need and that will best help them. And knowing that it is not about the way that you may have entered your recovery or are guiding your recovery. So we want to keep it student focused. We want it to remain impartial. And especially with the seasons that we are in politically, that might be hard sometimes, but we want to have seats at the table for everybody. So as the staff member that is running it, we want to remain impartial so that all students feel welcome to be a part of. If there is ever a time when students are in conflict with each other, seeking consultation so that way you know how to best manage that, coordinate that, so that way you can remain impartial, and figuring out what those boundaries are for yourself. Also acknowledging that there is a power differential. Even if, and I know many people in collegiate recovery programs have gone through their CRP on their campus and then stay on as staff, but there is a power differential that occurs once you are an employee of the university. So recognizing that power differential and doing what a person can to navigate that so that way we aren't harming our students. Because ultimately, impact is more important than intent. And I know we hear that in many different spaces. And I would venture to say the vast majority of people never intend to hurt somebody, but people still get hurt. And we need to recognize that that impact is what's important. So owning mistakes, acknowledging harm that's done, but keeping in mind that your impact is important, especially as an employee of the university or an intern of the university or a volunteer at the university. Seeking supervision when necessary. And I would venture to say that it's frequently necessary, even if you're not sure that anything is going on. It's always important to chat with other people, have a network of people that you can kind of get out of your own head with. Because I don't know about you, but I can make anything sound real good in my own head. So when I'm working in a silo, I might be doing things that inadvertently cause harm because I'm not talking with other people about what's going on. So regularly seeking supervision is really important. No physical or romantic relationships. So if you look up the actual document of ethical considerations for collegiate recovery professionals, there is more language around all of these. And what it does say around no physical or romantic relationships is to be mindful of that. We often know that with that power differential and a vulnerable population, there is harm that can be caused. Another part of this first ethical principle is monitoring your personal and professional functioning. So knowing when you might be experiencing symptoms of burnout and need to take a break, knowing when your mental health might not be where it could be or should be or would be or where you want it to be, and taking care of that. So self-care in a field where we give so much to others is really important. The second principle is autonomy. So knowing that people, students, have the right to self-determination, they have the right to autonomy. Our students can define recovery for themselves. The Collegiate Recovery Program might have parameters or definitions. SAMHSA has a definition for recovery, but we also want to allow students the right to express themselves the way that they need to and to define recovery for themselves. It's important that multiple pathways are recognized. So kind of going back to what I said earlier, just the way that one person got sober isn't necessarily the way that the next person will, or one person's journey in recovery isn't going to look like the next. So recognizing and allowing for multiple pathways, whether that is AA, all recovery, smart recovery, talking with students about everything that is available, because there are many, many, many different opportunities. That doesn't mean that your CRP doesn't have any practical expectations, right? Like we don't have to be completely without boundaries. We expect collegiate recovery professionals to set practical expectations for collegiate recovery programs that will provide a safe and stable, supportive, welcoming, inclusive, diverse environment for all of our students. And also being sure that you use your campus needs to guide the CRP development. And what that can look like is doing some assessments on campus, or if there already is data, using the data that you already have on your campus. Because my collegiate recovery community at the University of Delaware looks very different than Lily's collegiate recovery community at the University of Texas or Austin. Well, she'll clarify. But knowing what your campus needs and then using that information to guide your CRP is also part of the second ethical principle. And the third one is competence. So this is an ever-changing field. If you have worked or are working in the field of drug and alcohol, we know that there are trends. We know that there are things that constantly shift and constantly change. So maintaining relevant continuing education is part of your ethical responsibilities. So in collegiate recovery programs, there's a lot of moving parts. It's about knowing the trends in drug and alcohol, knowing the trends in recovery, knowing the trends on your campus, knowing the trends of the students that you're serving. So maintaining that relevant continuing education is really important. Lived experiences are also incredibly important, and they should be supported with some type of theory or some type of education around higher ed, human development, counseling, some other type of training. So, although lived experience is incredibly important, it is not the only thing that should be guiding your development as a collegiate recovery professional. As we see, many collegiate recovery programs also include things that are not just related to drug and alcohol use. So, our collegiate recovery program is open to students at any point in their recovery journey, but recovery from drugs and alcohol, eating disorders, gambling, gaming, you name it. And not all of that is within the scope of my training. So, knowing when I need to refer out, knowing when I need to increase my awareness and education around things is also part of this principle. And I will turn it over to Lily for number 4.
So we have 3 more principles. So number 4 is about honesty and integrity. Again, as Jessica mentioned, we have a nice, much longer document on the ARHE website. And so you can continue to refer back to that. But when we're talking about honesty and integrity, we're talking about personally what we say and then continuing to do what we say we're going to do and say what we're going to do as well. So number 1 is develop and disseminate the appropriate policies and procedures to guide your collegiate recovery program. Helping students know, hey, like if this happens, this is going to happen afterwards. Helping other staff know that. So it's something that can be just clear, cause a lot of like calmness when we do these kind of things. Number 2 is being honest in interactions with students about what's going to happen next. If somehow you think that being honest is going to cause more harm, that's a big sign that there's some consultation with some outside forces that need to happen. Because we've all been in some really interesting situations when we work in collegiate recovery. But being honest, is an important value for us as ethics. Modeling and maintaining those appropriate boundaries with our collegiate recovery students, being mindful that, again, this is very much dependent on your location. I've worked in collegiate recovery now in a big city and in a much smaller town. And, there was a time when I could not go to my own recovery meetings in town without running into students, but learning how to maintain boundaries, even if there was not a meeting I could attend by myself versus here in Austin, I have plenty of opportunities to find meetings that don't have students. But making sure that I can maintain that neutrality for students. And when I couldn't, making sure that I found different ways to keep my recovery that wouldn't impinge on that for students. And then making sure, again, sponsoring a student from your collegiate recovery program, this ones are very easy, like that would probably be an ethical violation. Again, mindful of those interactions with students, avoiding the exploitation of students, particularly in like the accepting of gifts, social media, like, are you friending students on your personal social media accounts? Does that mean that they're seeing your memes? Or are you making sure that if they're being friended, they're friending like a professional account? And that way, the professional account of your collegiate recovery program. So it's a different model there. Fundraising, some of us have fundraising as part of our jobs. Following up with development, very much making sure that you're ethically on the up and up when it comes to anything financially related. And similarly, with evaluation and data and research, making sure that you're following all your institutional review board research requirements when it comes to that. Upholding institutional policies and licensing board and state law. These are important things to do. I know that we all work for institutions where every once in a while we're like, they should tweak that. We can follow up internally and practice telling people what we think should be tweaked, but we, as people with, honesty and integrity, need to uphold those institutions and requirements and our professional development requirements as well. So number 5, very important, is justice and equity. There's a lot of work to do to help remove barriers so that students can access the support that they need. And as professionals, our job is to maintain a student-centered philosophy to help remove those barriers, that we're focusing not on always what will make my day-to-day easier, but on what will make it easier for students to access me/the work that we do. Recognizing the inherent dignity, the worth, potential, and the uniqueness of every student within their social context, their cultural contexts, every part of their context is something that we find really important. And then advocating for accommodations so that students can all be fully included in meetings, activities, outings. And this does include a lot of things. This might include communication, physical, like do you have doors that open easily? Do you, are you ADA compliant? Do you have access to like sign language? Do you have in every Zoom meeting the captions on without having to have a student request it a week in advance? Like, have you made these things easier for your students to access? And so that is just part of the work that we do. And last, but definitely not least, fidelity and responsibility. So number one is take responsibility for yourself. The actions you do and the actions that you don't do, we're responsible for ourselves. And we're also responsible to help our colleagues. If we see a colleague who is acting in a way that makes us uncomfortable or that we worry could cause harm, it's our job to say something. It's our job to help our coworkers become accountable. It's our job to help educate. And it's our job to help safeguard our students. And I know that is a level of emotional labor that is not always well received, but it's part of our job if we are thinking about impact over intent. Balancing our student interests with our employers' interests. And again, if these conflict, this is a great time to seek supervision. I live in Texas. I'm going to be very clear on we follow all of the laws of Texas. And again, sometimes that means seeking supervision to find out how can I best serve student interests and my employer's interests and the state of Texas interests. And those can be difficult sometimes to manage, but this is part of my job, is to find the legal, appropriate, ethical way through that. Maintaining confidentiality requirements. Similar with social media, you could put this in here, but depending on where your collegiate recovery program is located in your university, you might only be following FERPA. You might be following FERPA and HIPAA. You might be following FERPA and 42 CFR Part 2. You might be following all three. All of those are different confidentiality requirements. All of them have slightly different things. If you have student scholarships, if you have social media where pictures of students might exist, you will have lots of different ways to help maintain confidentiality requirements. And again, discretion for student privacy. Students still deserve privacy, and that should be prioritized for their futures, even when it would make our lives easier, maybe not to do that. We need to make sure that we prioritize, again, the student interest there with above a need for marketing and above a need for many other things. So those are our 6 main different points that we have for our ethical document. And then I'm going to pass it back to Jess to talk about how we do some decision making.
Absolutely. But before we do that, we did have a few questions that came in. And I do know that these ethical principles can feel a little heavy or a little confusing sometimes. So is everybody okay if I stop sharing for a minute? Like, stop sharing my screen so you can just, yeah, let's do this. And let's have a conversation around this because I can see the chat better at this point. And I will pick it up in a minute. One question that came in was, do you have recommendations for seeking out training in counseling theory? And that their university offers a master's degree in that area, but perhaps something less involved is what we may have meant. Yes, so you can absolutely take a class and get a degree in it. I'm wondering, though, if the Higher Ed Center has ever done a webinar or has ever done anything on student development theory. So something short, like a webinar, or maybe a paper that somebody can read. But also what can count for continuing education is just doing your own research. We hopefully all know how to sift through things on the internet and find accurate information. And reading a book on it or reading a few journal articles on it can be really helpful and can count towards that continuing education piece. Lily, is there anything you want to add?
There are a number of, professional development organizations. I'm thinking of NADAC is a great one that often has some things in this. Both Jessica and I have done some work with the Association of Recovery in Higher Ed that was on TPN as well. So there are a lot of places that if you don't have the ability to take a whole class or read a whole book, there's plenty of like great webinars and online courses. So
for me, prior to working in higher ed, I came from the treatment world. So I've been working in the drug and alcohol field since 2001. And I think the biggest learning curve for me once I started at the University of Delaware in 2011 was learning about student development theory and the workings of higher education, because it can be such an interesting field. And hopefully that answers your question. And then the second question was general advice for navigating our role when complications arise from students' relationships, social and or intimate, with one another. Lily, do you have stuff to say?
Too many things to say. The first is that it is our goal to be neutral. And this can be really hard. I have navigated some pretty fun, exciting. I mean, I've gotten to officiate the weddings for numbers of my students throughout the years after they graduated. To be clear there. But, you know, I've dealt with what happens during an ugly breakup, what happens when two of our students engage in a romantic relationship and all of a sudden a Title IX issue comes up. And Title IX says we can't engage or talk about it at all until it's, you know, gone through the Title IX process. How do we make the space safe for both students? And we're not legally allowed to do things. General advice is seek consultation. Don't do it alone, because we'll talk about moral injury in a little bit later, but this is often, especially when there's something that goes really terribly poorly, this is where moral injury can occur. But recognizing, like, whether it's a counselor on your campus, I know a lot of us do this work alone on our campus, but there's also often other types of community centers or student success programs that do have people who are doing similar work and have had similar experiences. So finding people both on your campus and then finding people doing the work on other campuses. Again, ARHE has a lovely Tuesday staff chat, and saying, oh my gosh, what the heck do I do? That seeking consultation piece is something that when complications arise from student relationships, I'm a big fan of. So.
And what also comes to mind is students have the right to autonomy. So if they are choosing to become involved in a relationship with another person in the CRP, and they have that right, but perhaps having conversations with them privately, right? So problem solving before a problem occurs, having that conversation, coming up with a plan, coming up with any concerns. If X happens, what do we do with Y? If A happens, what do we do about B? And being transparent and honest. I think that's also really helpful in situations like that. Do we have any other questions about these 6 principles that we talked about, or any other thoughts or concerns? Before, you can drop them in the Q&A, or you can put them in the chats. And of the people that we have with us today, can you drop in the chat, like, if you're working in a CRP or a CRC, or if you are kind of CRP or CRC adjacent, interested in collegiate recovery, or kind of where you're at right now with your role and the collegiate recovery professional role? That would be really helpful. Oh. See, we have somebody raising a hand. Do we have a way to take them off mute?
Unfortunately, not in this format, but I have just ensured that the attendees should be able to chat with everybody now. So the chat should be working and able to correspond back.
Great. Thank you so much, Anthony. Right. Thank you so much, everybody. It looks like we have a lot of people interested in starting one, CRP adjacent, interning. I love it. And there we go. So chat had been disabled and now it's not. So thank you so much. And I guess a second question, kind of like at that follow-up, especially for those that are interested in starting a collegiate recovery program, are you connected with the Association of Recovery in Higher Education? Is that something that you are aware of and something that you have found support through? Yes. Fantastic. Because there is technical assistance that's available through ARHE, which can be so helpful. And I can't speak for Lily, but I'm pretty sure that she would say you can always reach out to her. You can always reach out to me. We'll include our emails at the end. So I will go back to sharing my screen. And so ethical decision-making models. There are so many to choose from. Part of what the Collegiate Recovery Ethical Considerations group also looked at was, okay, so once somebody has identified a ethical dilemma, conundrum, then what? What happens, right? So we want to be able to give some guidance after that. So there were many models to choose from. ARHE does not endorse one ethical decision-making model over another. If you have a really great one that you love, share that in the chat with others, because that would be really helpful information. But in reviewing different ethical decision-making models, we learned that they do have 4 kind of similar components to them. An awareness that something has occurred, right? So an awareness of this ethical dilemma, ethical conundrum, what's going on, because if we don't have an awareness of it, then we're just doing our job and not really realizing our impact. Grounding is typically the second. Support and implementation. So to talk about that a little bit more, recognition that the dilemma exists and recognition of the repercussions of the decisions that we're making, and being able to think that through, playing the tape all the way through and recognizing your impact that you can have on others. Grounding. So we don't have to do this work in a silo. There are many different supports that we have around us. Whenever we recognize that a dilemma occurs, of course, we want to ground our decisions in things like ethical considerations, legal standards, and institutional policies. So if we are unfamiliar with those things, it would become our responsibility to look into them. What are the ethical obligations? That is part of the reason for the development of this guide. So that way we can put some boundaries and some parameters around the work that we're doing. So I would consult the ethical considerations. I would look at the legal standards. What are, for example, the confidentiality? Is it FERPA, HIPAA, 42 CFR? I would consult that. If possible, I would consult the legal counsel at my institution. And also looking at institutional policies for guidance as well. What am I allowed to do within my role at the university? And seeking consultation, because again, I can make anything sound really good in my own head. So I'm going to talk about it, right? I'm going to ask other people what they think. I would probably, for myself, I would start with other people that are doing drug and alcohol work at the university. And then if they're not really familiar with whatever I'm talking about or whatever I'm thinking about, going to my colleagues in ARHE as well, my network, or going to both, because it couldn't hurt to really get all these different perspectives. And then I'm going to identify the possible solutions and those repercussions and document along the way. So thinking about, if I do this, then these things might happen, or if I do this, then these things might happen. And then documenting in whatever way makes sense for the institution that you're at. So for me, I have a very specific place, a very specific record keeping opportunity that I have where I can document the reasoning for my decisions, who I talked to, and what my thinking was. Because in ethical dilemmas, there often isn't one right answer. There's a lot of gray, there's a lot of opportunities to create some variables around that. Right. So suggestions for resolving conflict. Oftentimes when somebody is experiencing an ethical dilemma, they might not be aware that their behaviors, their attitudes are having an impact on others. So oftentimes we can resolve conflict just by initiating a private conversation with someone. So I'll reveal that that third scenario that we talked about with using an app that tracks a person's runs was an experience that I had. I had somebody who was working with me in the collegiate recovery program, and they were a runner and they used Strava and they were friending students. And I paused because coming from a clinical background, I'm like, I don't think I would do that. But at that point, we didn't have ethical considerations. So I'm like, I don't know what I would do. Like, right. I had kind of no parameters, no framework around what I was thinking or feeling. So I had a conversation with my coworker at that point, and I said, you know, these are the things that I would be concerned about. So you run, it shows a map, they would know where you live. Are you okay with that? Right. So having that private conversation led to them then making a different decision around it. So oftentimes when we are coming across with ethical dilemmas, it really is just a lack of awareness around the impact that our behaviors can have. And then the second thing would be to pursue institutional resources. So say you have that conversation and that person is doing things that could be seen as unethical and they don't want to make any changes, then talk with others about that. And that's going to look different depending on your role, their role, where the university sits with the collegiate recovery program, whether that's talking with their director, their manager. So utilizing whatever institutional resources are available is typically that next step as well. All right, I'm going to toss it back to Lily before we go on to those three things again.
Right. So this, I'm going to tell y'all, this is the time if you have some ethical thoughts, questions you want to ask, start putting them in our Q&R or Q&A right now. And we're going to go back over the polls that we answered at the beginning. So I don't know, Anthony, if we can pull the answers to those back up for people to see. If not, I can see them and tell you what the results are.
I've just shared the results for the first poll.
Perfect. Okay. So the first question we asked was, should I, as a staff member, attend the meetings on campus? And I love this because we have like, yes, with boundaries, of course, all the way to like, absolutely not, no, maybe. And I want to ask, if you guys want to put in the chat, what was part of your decision making? So if you had an answer here, what maybe was part of that? So yeah, it's for the students. It's not your recovery. Yeah. Power dynamics and privacy. These are great. So one of the things that I love about this is I think the answer for this changes a lot on what the dynamics are. For clinicians, if they're leading the meeting and it's not a mutual aid meeting, the answer is like, of course. We wouldn't be involved in a mutual aid meeting if we're clinicians. You know, there's a boundary there. For people in recovery who are like staff and also students, well, why wouldn't I? So there's a lot of different, again, one of the things about our field is that there are people who have different roles in our field. And there are campuses that are very different. And because, you know, if you're a peer recovery support specialist, going to a meeting is often just something that happens as part of the job. I previously worked as a PRSS, and driving people to meetings in an area that didn't have public transport, something I've been paid to do. Going to the meeting was absolutely part of my job as a resource, you know, connector. However, if I were, you know, somebody's trauma therapist, attending a meeting would not. I'm not a therapist and I'm not a trauma therapist, but like that would definitely not be about it. So here's the question, should I as a staff member go? The answer is it depends on your role. It depends on your campus culture. It depends on a lot of things. Some people attend meetings, but they don't talk. Some people talk. When I attend meetings, I have a 5-year rule. I don't talk about anything in my recovery that is less than 5 years old, as in like it's got to be something that's a very closed book kind of issue rather than something that I may be currently going through. So if it's similar to PRSS rules, like I have an experience, strength, and hope that I think very directly can match, or like I've had students who it's their first time chairing a meeting and they've asked me to, be with them to help them navigate that. We practice beforehand, but I'll stay there. These are types of things. But again, it's not my meeting as a staff member. It's a meeting for the students, by the students. The students are, hopefully chairing the meeting. Again, but depends on the meeting, depends on lots of things. It's the week before school starts. They haven't signed up for who's chairing yet. So boundaries, one of the big things that we have to say is if we're staff in meetings, reminder that if students say something in an on-campus meeting where staff are present, including student staff, Title IX reporting is a requirement for us because we are not a clinical program. And again, if this were, say, a program in a counseling center, that might not be a requirement. However, if we happen to be, here's a fun off-campus rule for off-campus and somebody shares that, and I'm not like wearing my UT name tag, Title IX reporting is apparently not a requirement because they're not trying to share to anybody in the university. They may not even know that I exist as part of the university. I may not know the person sharing something happens to be a UT student. So that's, a big difference. Again, there's lots of different answers for should I attend the meeting on campus? And there's not one particular ethical one except for making sure that you are honest about what your role might be, what impact that might have on the students, making sure that you are being, if it's a student-centered meeting, that it is a student-centered meeting, not a let me lead my small cult right here kind of meeting. Because let's not pretend that personalities can't be pretty awesome in our field. But if you're a clinician, it may be very inappropriate for you to attend an on-campus mutual aid meeting, and that's okay too.
Absolutely. In reading some of the chat, some of what had come up was yes with boundaries, right? So exactly what you were saying as well. So I will be there and students feel safe with me there, but I'm going to be very aware of what I share, right? Because it's not about my recovery. So for on UD's campus, we have weekly check-ins and I am there at that. And I might share some personal things, right? Like they know I have kids, but it's very I'm not vulnerable with them. These are things that most people know about me anyway. So I can be a person and I can share things, but it's nothing that I'm falling apart about because I would use other resources for that because the weekly check-in is not about me. We also have all recovery meetings on campus and other mutual aid meetings on campus that I am not at. So giving students options is also really important.
Great. Any other thoughts for this question?
And it could be very different if you are in a rural area where there are only so many meetings. And that goes for off-campus as well, because that came up in the chat, or in the Q&A, like addressing the off-campus piece. Again, being thoughtful about it, being mindful about it. If you are in an area where you are limited with what you have resource-wise, then of course going to those meetings makes sense. If you're in a city and there are hundreds of meetings to choose from, might be a different decision to make.
Yes. So our next slide is about the second question. Do I give a student another chance when their attitude is that they are not willing to adhere to the commitment of your collegiate recovery program contract? Y'all should be able to see that answer shared now too. And I know our slides aren't changing on the screen back to the questions, but we'll get there. But thoughts about this one, because this one has even more answers.
Okay.
And I'll say, we experienced this at UT on a semesterly basis. I think a lot of larger programs experience this pretty regularly. We're an open meeting or an open program, so there's not a membership contract. There are expectations for being in our space, but we don't have a particular membership model, in fact. So our rules are pretty open, and yet we still have to take care of the community. And how someone's behavior affects other students, as well as like some very, very high level safety, tends to be our biggest concerns, I'll be honest. We've never had a band that didn't have another like a way back. Like we've always been we hope that we're always very clear with our students about what they need to do in order to be welcomed back into the space. And we're always hopeful for that. And we celebrate that also every semester, which is very exciting. There are people we've had to ask to leave the center who now work for us, which is very fun. But thoughts. So I have a yes with boundaries, depends on what the non-adherence is. But yes, needing to protect the group. Yeah. And again, this one is another one of those that it depends on the violation. Is this somebody who keeps showing up to the space under the influence? Is this somebody who tried to offer other people in the space a substance? Is this somebody who just needs a higher level of care, and the amount of chaos that they may be causing is no longer appropriate? Is this somebody who continually repeats misogynistic statements or violates some other value of the community? Is this like what the violation is does matter. What type of community you have? Are you a community that has abstinence as a requirement, or abstinence as an orientation, or are you very harm reduction open? And again, every campus has to decide those things for their own community. Are you a community that has like a very nice contract students sign? Or are you similar to UT Austin, in which we don't have a membership model at all? All of those things can have an impact.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great place where we can also advocate, right, based on the ethical considerations. If we are walking into an already established program that maybe has a very strict contract, or is abstinence based, or is AA focused, that's a great opportunity to advocate, to look at the standards and recommendations, and to advocate internally for removing some barriers. There was a question about what those violations could look like, and I think, Lily, you did an excellent job answering that question. And just being mindful of the time as well. So
we're going to do the last one kind of fast. Strava, y'all kind of agreed. Yeah, this is something that this happens, and it's easy to pick on Strava because many of us are like, no, I don't want other people to know where I live. But there's lots of different types of social media. And being aware of what we post on our social media, that not just what we post, but oftentimes social media likes to tell other people what you like, can be a big issue. Again, not just politically, but personally, morally, ethically. You know, I hope we are all adults who have private lives. And I hope that as much as we can share and be human, that we get to keep our private lives private, for the sake of ourselves and our students. But figuring out, you know, some people really love social media and following their students on it because it's how they find out what their students are doing. And while that's great, it's that double-edged sword of, are we respecting our students' autonomy? Are we giving them the chance to tell us that they relapsed before we find out on Snapchat? That's, you know, a real example that we've had.
And recognizing that power differential. So even if you ask a student if they're okay with it, they might not feel empowered to say no, because you hold the power in the relationship. So just being really mindful about the decisions that you're making. And that gets tricky. That gets tricky when people come through the collegiate recovery program and then end up as a person who is working there, because they might still be friends with them. But navigating that can be done. I would encourage people to seek supervision and to talk about it and to come up with a plan on what that can look like. And yes, there was something in the chat, currently struggling with something at the moment around like we never abandon our students. Correct. We don't want to abandon our students. We want to break down the barriers that they have to get the resources that they need while also keeping the collegiate recovery program safe. So figuring out what that can look like. Maybe it's providing individual support, but they are no longer a part of the larger group until things shift and change, depending on what had occurred.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on, we can close this out. Questions. I wanted to get to this slide. I like this slide. The owl looks very curious. And I think that we've had a lot of questions, a lot of great discussion throughout the webinar as well. Thank you, Christina, for dropping that in the chat too. Students are not friends. That is accurate. Which can feel like you can still be warm and fuzzy and have a great rapport with people and they're not your friends, and that's okay. So I'm going to drop my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me if there is any way that I can be helpful.
In my much longer email as well.
Excellent. Well, I also don't see any other questions coming in. I just want to say a big thank you to Lily and Jessica for sharing of yourself and your expertise with our audience. And a big thank you to ARHE for sponsoring and collaboration for today's session. I do just have a couple of closing housekeeping slides I'd like to share with everybody, and then we can adjourn for the day. Just a few upcoming events I'd like to share with everybody. Our Fall Learning Collaborative around the Biennial Review will be taking place next month on the 10th. Our next free webinar will be taking place on the 24th and is titled The Color of College Health, Utilizing the LEAP Strategy to Improve the Well-Being of Minority Students. And we also have a Fundamentals of Substance Misuse Prevention in Higher Education series that will launch in November. And with that, just a friendly reminder that today's session has been recorded, so you can expect to see the session recorded uploaded to our website within about 3 business days. Of course, we encourage you to connect with us in ARHE, and here on the screen is how you can do so. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, all.